testing that we do to the swords. And I just wanted to lay out the premise of my premise and have both of you react to it. First of all, we let the teams do two tests. And those two tests are to show the utility of the sword, not its durability. So we're not trying to break the sword. We're not trying to dull it. We're trying to show that it can actually do what a sword is supposed to do. And so there we'll have at least one slashing or cutting test and then one thrusting test. And so those will be things that the teams will do to demonstrate that their sword is capable of performing like a sword. And then even in the qualifying rounds, we'll have one or two tests that the judges do that will be more substantial. But in the qualifying rounds, the judges' tests will not be intended to actually challenge the blade in terms of creating something that will damage the blade. It's really just to let the judges get the feel for that weapon and be able to make some judgment about which two in each qualifying round go to the finale. But then in the finale, there will be tests that challenge the durability of the sword and its capability of doing things. And so that's my sense of philosophically what we're doing. We're not going to say what those tests are, but this will at least give the teams a good sense of the kinds of tests that we're going to do. And I know, Ben and David, you and I have talked about these tests, and you came up with some proposals, and we got some ideas out there. But I wondered if you had any reactions to that as my understanding of what we're trying to do with the testing we do for the competition.
I mean, for us, the ideal tests are ones that make the judging easy to understand, right?
Yep.
Like sometimes we'll have a beautiful looking sword that weighs 40 pounds and an ugly sword that weighs a pound and a half. And we're trying to explain to the audience that that one's too heavy and it just, but the audience is like, but it's so beautiful. And it did cut one of the things. Like, how is it not, it smashed through that
Yeah.
pig or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Of course it did. It weighed 40 pounds.
We often call those one-hit wonders in that you can swing it and do damage, but if you miss with that first shot, you're done because there's no recovery.
Yes.
With a sword, when you're cutting, you need to be able to cut, but you also need to be able to recover and parry if your cut isn't successful. And I think that's super important to understand that though the testing will be, at least in the finales, fairly extreme to push the blade to its limits, but at the same time, our goal is not to do destructive testing. Correct. Our goal is to test the sword in a situation that it may have been used in.
Right.
So all of the tests are kind of designed to push the sword to its limits, but those limits are within the parameters of how a sword would be used. And I think, certainly when Ben and I were working on Forged in Fire, the first round, the knife stuff, that's destructive testing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're smashing pipes and we're smashing the famous torpedo. Those things are intentionally destructive testing. And even with all that destructive testing, at least one knife in each show made it through that destructive testing.
Yep.
Which shows you that yes, it can be done with the materials that we gave them to work with. It sucks when something breaks, but then once we got to the sword testing, a lot of that testing, though it was extremely aggressive testing,
right?
Would a sword come in contact with a piece of wood? Yeah, certainly. Well, I swing, I miss, I hit a door. But would a sword come in contact with a piece of metal? Of course, the other sword's a piece of metal.
Yep.
So things like that stress a sword, but within the parameters of how a sword's supposed to be used.
And I will tell the students that although it might have been possible for a sword to be impacted by a cannonball, theirs will not be impacted by a cannonball.
Yeah, and
The problem with that whole scenario of impacted by a cannonball is the sword might survive, but whoever's holding it is probably kind of done for the day.
yeah, and David, I loved your explanation. That's exactly what I think we're trying to do. With the most aggressive test should be something a sword would have to do, and that's
Yeah.
typically what I've told people in the past when they've asked me what the tests are. I said the test will be something that item you've been asked to make would be ordinarily expected to encounter in
No.
service.